It makes me sick that they think we're this dumb. 85% of Gaza has been destroyed in this pre-planned, controlled demolition of Gaza. Bibi Netanyahu is on camera explicitly before October 7th saying we need to hit them so hard that they can't come back. Jared Kushner is involved in, he will financially benefit from whatever they build in its place. Again, all of this began before October 7th.
He said it out loud, and suddenly everything feels different. Have you ever listened to someone and wondered whether they were promising a future or confessing a plan? Because in this clip, that line gets dangerously thin. Reporters on the ground translated an Israeli piece that names names: Jared Kushner, Peter Thiel, Larry Ellison. Visions of rebuilding Gaza as a tax-free, billionaire playground. Sounds fantastical or horrifying? Which is it, a bold redevelopment plan or a roadmap for erasing the people who live there? Think about that for a second. What does it mean when redevelopment is talked about before the rubble has even cooled? When a powerful figure casually mentions waterfront property being very valuable and muses about moving people out to clean it up, do we call it urban planning, or do we call it something else entirely?
There are real fears on the part of Arabs, and I'm sure you talk to a lot of them, who think once Gazans leave Gaza, Netanyahu's never going to let them back in.
Maybe, but I'm not sure there's much left of Gaza at this point. So, if you think about even the construct, like, Gaza was not really a historical precedent, right? It was the result of a war. And so my sense is I would say, how do we deal with the terror threat that is there so that it cannot be a threat to Israel or to Egypt, right? I think that both sides are spending a fortune on military. I think neither side really wants to have, a terrorist organization enclaved right between them. I mean, Gaza's waterfront property, it could be very valuable, but I think from Israel's perspective, I would do my best to move the people out and then clean it up.
Now hold on. We all know Candace Owens stirs the pot. But is it fair to only mock the messenger while ignoring what she's pointing at? If she says the wealthy stand to profit, and then you see an article in Israeli media that talks about investors and AI centers and normalization with other Arab states, are you going to laugh and move on, or are you going to ask a better question? Who benefits and at what cost? So here's the uncomfortable one. If you're designing a shiny new skyline, who gets to live there? If the plan requires moving millions, is that development or displacement? Ethnic cleansing is a heavy term, but you can't lighten it by pretending the language doesn't matter when decision-makers use it in public. And what about our own reactions? We get furious when a pundit says something provocative, and we demand denunciations. Fine. But are we equally quick to denounce the people who might actually stand to profit from the outcome? Do our outrage filters work the same way for wealthy insiders as they do for provocative outsiders? Why is one labeled delusional and the other given the benefit of the doubt? Listen to the tone in the room. There's anger, sure, but there's also a weary clarity. When mainstream outlets treat an entire people as expendable, that's not neutral journalism, that's a narrative being built. And when that narrative syncs up with interests that smell like real estate and tech money, shouldn't our skepticism spike? Ask yourself this. If Gaza becomes a literal playground for billionaires, who picks up the tab for rebuilding? Who decides who returns? Who guarantees safety for communities uprooted by war and policy? These aren't rhetorical cushions. They're the hard logistical, moral, and legal questions that get brushed aside when the conversation is dominated by headlines and hot takes.
He said it out loud.
Yep.
He said it out loud, guys. So look, I have a lot of areas of disagreement with Candace Owens. There's no question. But to make her out to be insane for saying statements like that, I think is crazy. The people accusing her of being crazy are the real insane people, because it's all right here in front of us, guys.
So where does accountability fit in? If someone says on tape that moving people out could be part of a plan, do we treat that as an allegation to investigate or an idea to excuse? And when public figures shrug or suggest maybe, who is policing that shrug? This moment forces us to confront something bigger than a single clip. It asks, how do power, profit, and policy collide in the aftermath of violence? Who rewrites the map and who gets erased in the process? If you had to bet, On profit, on justice, on the rule of law? Where would you place your chips? We can spend all day arguing who's credible and who isn't. Or we can follow the trails, follow the money, follow the language, and follow the consequences. Because words spoken in polished rooms echo in ruined neighborhoods. And when the future of millions is discussed like a line item, the rest of us should stop, listen, and demand more than spin. So, what do you think? Is this a developer's dream, a geopolitical strategy, or something darker? And if it is darker, what do we do with that knowledge? And then, just when it seemed like speculation, someone went on record. He said it out loud, and suddenly the conversation stops being hypothetical. What happens when plans for a city are sketched out before the people who live there can even come home? According to an Israeli report the hosts read on air, names like Jared Kushner, Peter Thiel, Larry Ellison, even Tony Blair and tech figures are already in talks about rebuilding Gaza as a tax-friendly hub for startups, server farms, and factories. Does that sound like rebuilding for the people who survived the war, or rebuilding for whoever writes the checks? Listen to this for a second.
Yeah. So, all right, let's start with Jared Kushner. So he says, well, the people are saying conspiratorially, the guy's trying to give him a layup that they're going to move out the Palestinians. I mean, that's ethnic cleansing.
And not let them come back.
And not let them come back. And Jared Kushner's like, yeah, maybe. In other words, yeah, of course that's our plan. And then he goes on to confirm. For he says Gaza doesn't even exist. It's it's a historical context, war, blah, 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 blah. Okay, and maybe we move the people out. Yeah, that's called ethnic cleansing, and you're saying it on tape. And you're saying, I want to do it so I can make more money. Is that a trope? Because I didn't say it, you said it. So, okay, so your plan is to murder these people, ethnically cleanse them, destroy all of Gaza so you could rebuild it as waterfront property for you and for Israel. Well, I don't know anything more disgusting than that. Don't come at me about denouncing Candace Owens until you denounce Jared Kushner. Okay, did anybody denounce Jared Kushner? Did anybody call him an anti-Muslim bigot, a terrorist? Someone who wants to ethnically cleanse 2.2 million people? No, I'm not gonna denounce Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens or anyone else who, by the way, treat the Palestinians and Muslims and Arabs these days in a shocking turn of events as if they're human beings more so than mainstream media does, way more. Denounce all of mainstream media who treats the Palestinians as dispensable and not fully human.
100%.
I denounce all of you, I denounce every cable news anchor.
The story they translated doesn't just talk about investment. It imagines a technocratic makeover, demilitarize, depopulate, and then repopulate with regulated free zones, cloud servers, and cheap labor. That's not urban planning language. That's the language of opportunity. Whose opportunity? Whose land? Whose history? And then there's the surveillance part. The piece links big tech and defense contractors, the kind of companies that sell tracking systems and data centers, into the picture, suggesting these tools could be used to monitor populations. Imagine a city rebuilt with the explicit intent to track and control who moves, who protests, who returns. Sound extreme? Maybe. Or maybe it's the kind of nightmare someone casually describes on tape while planners nod along. So what do we do with a clip like that? Do we laugh it off because the messenger is messy? Or do we take the claims seriously because the names involved are not jokers? They are people with money, influence, and real power to reshape lives? Candace Owens got roasted for saying something similar, and people called her conspiratorial. But when investors and former officials are reportedly planning the same future, we treat it like policy, or we don't report it at all. Why the double standard? Here's the hard pivot. The hosts point to explicit language. Terrorist enclave, will move people out, business plan, split up Gaza. Those phrases land heavy. If leaders talk about demolition and then talk about dividing land and profit shares, does intent matter less than outcome? If the people who live there are made to leave and a new skyline is built, who decides whether they can come back? Who holds the deed to their future? And let's talk about money and influence. The show traces donations and political vetting, examples of how billionaire money greases doors and pick committees. When power and capital are aligned, policy can look a lot like profit projection. So when a tech baron or a former prime minister is placed at the center of the reconstruction, whose interests are truly being served? There's also an ugly media question stitched through all of this. Why does reporting about these plans seem to be more available in Israeli outlets than in major US newsrooms? The answer some hosts give is blunt. American reporters fear the fallout. Accusations, canceled careers, the personal cost of covering sensitive topics. If that's true, what does it say about the stories that never make it to the American public? How many strategic plans are being discussed openly overseas while home audiences are told small, neat versions of the story? And we cannot ignore the human cost. Numbers and percentages and business plans are abstractions until you imagine families who may never return to their homes, elders who remember a neighborhood now described as prime waterfront, children who lose a childhood because their streets were redrawn by a meeting in a boardroom. When planning becomes a spreadsheet and humans become labor, that's not redevelopment, that's erasure. So, what's the moral line here? The hosts, outraged, incredulous, use the word people are scared to say: ethnic cleansing. They're not issuing a legal ruling, they're calling out what the language implies: removal, denial of return, replacement. If those are the consequences of a redevelopment plan, is there a more precise term? And if the people in power are casually discussing those outcomes, who investigates? Who intervenes? Ask yourself this. When a powerful figure says maybe on tape about moving populations, do we treat that maybe as a throwaway comment or as an opening gambit? When the same people who stand to profit suggest they'll clean it up, who gets the benefit of the doubt? The pundit with a provocative tweet or the billionaire with a letter of intent? This isn't just a debate about optics. It's about accountability. If journalists won't report it for fear of backlash, if institutions won't investigate because the names are untouchable, then what mechanism protects the people who can't sell their future to the highest bidder? If the plan is real, what legal and moral frameworks are being bypassed? If it's not real, why are so many powerful people comfortable talking about it like it already is? We can keep arguing who's credible and who's not. Or we can follow 3 simple threads. Follow the language, follow the money, follow the consequences. Because when conversations about renewal happen while buildings still smolder, the stakes are not abstract. They're life and land and the right to return. So where do you stand? Do you see this as a developer's dream, a geopolitical strategy, or something darker? And if it is darker, what are the steps we demand next? Investigation, transparency, protections for displaced people, or something else entirely? Think about that while you decide what counts as news, who gets to tell the story, and who gets to live through its aftermath.